Meeting for July 18th. So we've got a couple things on the agenda for today. Up first, RAIDZ Expansion, it looks like. So if you wanted to give us an update on that, Don, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, at the last meeting, I was just starting and hadn't put together the pull request yet, and that has happened. And it wasn't too bad. Brian, there was a collision in the DRAID section. You had added some code. I think if you have sectors that were uninitialized, there was a potential for corruption. And so that pull request was dependent on some structure fields that were removed as part of the RAIDZ expansion. And so I had to go put those back. I mean, it was basically, I think it was determined that they weren't needed anymore. So they had no consumers, but obviously in the future they did have a consumer. So I put that back, and there was a similar one in a different section of the code where a ZIO was being passed through a function and then it was removed because no one was consuming it. But turns out that with some of the changes you had made, there was a consumer. So changes like that. And then over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of cleanup in the code. Trivial things like assert, x equals 0 turns into assert zeros and things like that. And various cleanups where if you're not consuming an argument, there's a new convention where you void it in the function. So a lot of things like that. So I'm hoping I'm catching them all, but I probably missed a few, trying to catch up to the current state of the code cleanliness, if you will. Yeah. So trying to make sure that
it sounds like a lot of little mechanical changes or conflicts or that kind of stuff. It's just
yeah. And then going fine. And then I found, to my sort of astonishment, if you will, is that in the code we weren't actually enforcing the feature flag, and it was corrupting your pool. So and because most people just take the current code base, create a pool, add it, and so if you actually don't have it enabled, it did bad things and hung and anyway. So I added that last night. But in doing so, notice the comments for SPA VDEV attach is talking about mirrors, so I had to go clean up the comments there. And I'm working on a big theory comment for the RAIDZ VDEV RAIDZ code. So I'll be posting that shortly. But the current focus right now is on testing. There's the ZFS test suite, I think, is in good shape. It's passing. Then on Z-test, there was sort of two modes of running it. One where you can specify as the kind eRAIDZ, and then it would throw, an expansion in the mix. And then there was a more dedicated approach, which I think Stuart maybe did, where you actually just have a dedicated sort of test. It's sort of like the MMP test, it's like a one-off test inside of Z-test where you're not messing with all the craziness. You're just actually doing a focus test. And so that I kind of had to rework it to get it working, but it's working now. And that one, you pass in a -x and it'll create a pool, a RAIDZ pool, fill it up with a lot of data, about 20% of the capacity of the pool, and then attach a disk and then interrupt the reflow to confirm that we can survive, a crash, unexpected termination in the middle of reflow. So that test is in there. I haven't added it to Z-loop yet, but I plan to do that. So it'll get mixed in with our normal, regression testing that we do. So on the Z-test side, the other one, the one I first mentioned, I'm seeing about 5-ish consistently failing. It runs like eight Z loops, and then the eighth or ninth one fails, and go look at it, and there's a handful that I'm trying to figure out. There's a ZIO, unexpected ZIO error, device not configured, which ZIO layer itself will set that in certain cases if it can't determine the status of the VDEV, but there's no VDEV attached to it. So I'm that one's a little problematic to figure out, but I'll keep working on it. And then there's some code in there. I think Fedora added it, but on every import we check that we sanity check the scratch area that we're using, and it's failing asserts, and I don't quite understand. He has a code set up so you can actually, in discrete areas, of that where we're writing out the stuff, you can have it stop at that exact point and then do a validation. And some of those are failing. So I don't know if they're false positives or not, but I kind of think they are. But anyway, so there's a handful of Z-test things. Fun, the fun part of working on Z-test. You have to go, chase down all the problems it uncovers. So
Yeah.
I'm in that loop right now where, get a whole bunch of them, look for the pattern, see if I can figure out how to diagnose it further. So hopefully wrap that up this week. And then move on to kind of the final push would be getting reviewers. I've asked a few people. I think I pinged you, Brian, on that, but if you wouldn't mind looking at specifically at the DRAID, all the DRAID changes, because I think they're fine, but we need more eyes on it.
Be happy to look at that. That code was a little bit gnarly. Yeah, and it did get updated recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I haven't seen any outside people weighing in other than Fedora. But I've been doing tons of manual testing with real data and real arrays, and it seems fine.
Yeah. There's pretty good coverage for it in the test suite, right?
Yes.
A bunch of tests were added. Yeah.
Yeah, but no test to test a pool not having the feature enabled. I don't know if it'd be worth it to add that test. I mean, you could, certainly set compatibility equal to, some earlier thing and test that and just make sure that it returns an error, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
That seems worth it.
I mean, regression proofing, that would be nice. Yeah.
I think you can probably expand all the feature flags to make sure they actually don't work when they're not enabled.
Yeah, that'd be nice to have a generic test like that create a pool with that and then try to do it. But I could make it part of that. There's a RAIDZ, I think, suite. So it'd be pretty easy to do. That's what I was doing last night, manually testing it by creating it with the current code, creating it with a compatibility equaled 2000 or 2.2 or something like that. So.
Yeah. I think we've got a handful of those tests mixed in at the moment, but they're just kind of on a case-by-case basis, right, for various features. But I'm pretty sure there's one like that for DRAID too.
Yeah, and the other unfortunate thing I've noticed is that on stock master, Z-loop is failing, not as frequently, but constantly in DRAID and RAIDZ. And most common one is just hangs, and I haven't evaluated those. But
is that, Alexander, is that the same one you were seeing with you put it on Slack earlier last week, I think, where a bunch of tests you were seeing time out because they were hanging? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
No, I remember what you're talking about. Sorry, I missed what problem was mentioned here.
Don was seeing Z-loop hang, and I was wondering if it was maybe related.
I haven't seen Z-loop hanging. Z-loop usually crashing. Hangs I saw on some other tests.
Like regular tests, yeah.
Okay. I think it was during ZIL suspend. We have some test of removing ZIL or somehow else triggering ZIL suspend. It's a problem of ZIL suspend. That I'm not sure how it worked before. I written the description. I haven't created the issue, neither investigated myself. Should probably do one or another until it got lost from history.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go back and look at them. But I mean, I'm running it longer. Brian, do you know what the default time in a PR?
It's like 15 minutes or something like that. It's
okay. Yeah, I just really ran. I ran it for like 90 minutes, and then it wasn't clean. So this is just on stock master. So I was just sort of trying to baseline the current state of it. But and I'm running these longer, 900 minutes and 900 seconds. I think they normally run like for 500 or 600, and running it indefinitely until I fill up my disk with cores.
Regarding the ZIL suspend issue, I kind of suspect that's a recent regression. I don't recall seeing it, a month ago. So that might be bisectable, at least for that particular issue.
I haven't seen it before either, but as I quoted in that Slack message, I don't see how would it be new or mine.
Yeah.
Like I try to improve some issues around suspend, but it seems like orthogonal to what I fixed.
But I just noticed it caught made some of the tests in the BRT pull requests fail because they timed out because they got hung in the same spot.
Yeah. I say at a minimum, we could probably bisect that the last place it was working reliably, right? Which was not that long ago. Yeah, we need to run that down.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's all I had. I'm basically an update.
Yeah.
And making steady progress. Hopefully, optimistic that we can land this thing.
It sounds like great progress. So is the how old is what's in the PR right now? Did you push it recently, or is it from a week ago or the original push?
As far as based off master, or just in terms of commits?
You said you're making changes just yesterday. Like, I'm just wondering how fresh the current PR is.
I just made a commit this morning, I think.
Okay.
I didn't rebase. If I can I rebase and retain my commit history? I think I can, but
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been. I've been spot checking. There hasn't been significant changes. I mean, it's kind of slowed down when we were trying to release the final version. But
yeah, that sounds like great progress. Happy to see them moving forward again. It's very cool.
Yeah, that's a long time. That's too long to wait, I think, for your code, to try to merge back in. I can't imagine landing this in Illumos at this point, because it's been. I went over there and looked. I didn't see DRAID or other things. So
yeah. And those changes were pretty extensive. Like, even for part of the DRAID work, I remember we pulled out large sections of that were useful for the DRAID work out of the RAIDZ expansion code. So like a lot of refactoring happened there independently. Good cleanup.
Yeah. So I think it's in good shape.
Yeah. Cool.
Just time more reviews. Anybody that wants to take a peek at any section would be good.
Good. All right. What else do we have on the agenda for today?
I think the next one was mine. We saw a kind of interesting thing starting last week. If you have gang blocks, in this case, the pool is like 90-something% full, and there's just, I think, a lot of fragmentation and not a lot of free space. So it's resorting to using gang blocks, and we create a gang ADB to send down to the bio. And so when we prepend the gang header, the 512-byte gang header, we end up with an unaligned write that the 4K native drive refuses. So when we prepend the 512 bytes in the beginning, we add the right amount of padding to the end of the thing. But then when we're issuing it down to the bio, it's too big, so we're splitting it. And because we split it on a 4K page, we end up with a 512-byte thing and then a bunch of 4K pages, and now it's not 4K aligned, and the device will give you a write error. And then the second half has the same problem because it starts 4K aligned, but then it's got this unaligned bit at the end. And so it's throwing errors. It didn't do this in 0.8. It was introduced in 2.0.0 as part of the gang ADB concept, where we wouldn't have to, because in 0.8 we'd copy and remake a new linear buffer that was 4K aligned properly. But when we're doing the gang ADB thing to avoid all the memory copies, the problem is when it has to get split across BIOS, because there's the aggregation was too large, it's causing write errors basically. We've worked around it temporarily by setting the max aggregation size to 500 kilobytes, so that when you add a page at the beginning and the end, it stays under 512, and then the Linux bio layer doesn't want to split it that way. But so you were saying, Mev?
Yeah, I was going to say that I was hit by this problem, not by IBD problem, not the problem of gang blocks. When I was trying to optimize ZIL to avoid memory copies, I was trying to create ABDs not aligned to anything, just arbitrary, whatever I wanted, list of memory chunks. And while FreeBSD disk, VDF geom code was mostly happy to handle that just by creating a copy on demand at the end if it wasn't aligned. Linux doesn't do that, and it just tries to chunk, and it appears a problem as you describe it. So I ended up with concept that we do not support ABD not multiple to A shift. So idea to attach ABD to make it multiple of OK after it was 512 just can't work. Not at this point. We would either have to fix somewhere at the dev level or just originally do copy at the gang block creation instead of append one or another. But with in my Zeal case, I give up on that. I went different approach. I may be still fighting with it with some consequences. Just created one PR today. One issue is open, but that's a different story.
But yeah, we looked at possibly making it so that when we're using the A to B gang offset stuff, that it will make sure it returns something that's 4K aligned. So it will split some other page in the middle and leave the second half of it in the second block, so that that second block will then be 4K aligned as well. But that seemed a little gnarly, and we haven't, we've mostly just narrowed down what was causing this and managed to recreate it on purpose yesterday. Using the lowering the, was it Metaslab force gang setting to a smaller number and changing the code. So instead of a 3% chance, there's a 100% chance this will cause a gang block so that we could make this happen on demand.
So there may be one more problem if we try to make that function you mentioned, trying to cut it properly, then again at the block level, HBA or other controller may be unable to handle alignments not multiple to page size. And that's another threshold. Aside of A shift, we also have page size. And right now, every block that is bigger than page size, it's always aligned to page size. And every discontinuous are always multiple to page size. Modern NVMe should support arbitrary scatter gather, and some HBA support arbitrary scatter gather, but it's not 100%. I'm not sure how exactly Linux handles that, but I suspect, I tried to look, but if I remember correctly, it doesn't properly. It still kind of expects file system to do that. And so it's just opens so big can of worms that maybe just making gang blocks aligned originally maybe is the easiest way.
Yeah, but does that end up being an on-disk format change to force the gang blocks to always?
Oh, I think it's more a question how to allocate blocks in memory to avoid ganging there excessively.
Well, I mean, in this case, it's like we had this nice scatter gather list of pages, and then we needed to stick an unaligned header on the front of it. And then other than a memory copy, there's no way to make that aligned again, right?
No, if we know how much do we need to prepend, can we first just reserve some space or do it somehow that way? No, I'm not familiar right now with gang code, how exactly it does it, but.
Because yeah, like I was just thinking, if we have, the data was written to the ARC anonymously, and then when we go to allocate it, we find that we need the gang. We're now having to put some on the front. And so we already have nice page aligned data, but then we need to put a header on it.
Something on the front, we are not prepending to the data. We should be prepending to the list of blocks, if I understand correctly concepts.
Yeah, so we're prepending a 512 byte bit of data as the first to add to the beginning of the list. And
the list of blocks. Like what's the problem to allocate list of blocks with first prepending 512 bytes? It's not that we are copying data. Data will remain in ARC as usually, just temporary buffer used to allocate that. Again, I don't remember that code out of my head, but that's what I would think.
But it's just to realign it seems to be problematic, yeah. I was just wondering if anybody...
It shouldn't include copying megabytes of data. List of blocks should not be that big in worst case even. But
but when we actually write it to disk, it's going to be that 512 byte header and then all the data, which is now actually not going to be sector aligned anymore. Not that it matters,
why?
but-
You're talking about different data, but it will be separate ZIOs. We have one ZIO writing again here in list of chunks, and then a bunch of other ZIOs writing separate chunks. Each of them separately should be a shift aligned, right? Or where I'm wrong?
Yeah. This is the gang header we're prepending to the block, right? And it's
Yes.
just small. Right?
Yeah, it's just 512 bytes, but it's data that's going on disk and immediately followed by the actual user data. And the problem there being that it unaligns all the user data basically.
Yeah.
Maybe I forgot how it works. Sorry, then disregard, but
yeah.
We came across another kind of only slightly unrelated bit. The like vdev bio max segs or whatever, the function that figures out how many segments we should put in a bio, basically uses the define limit of 256 of them. But by default on Linux, all the regular disk devices have a max segments of 128. So we have a patch to actually ask the disk how many segments it'll take. So ZFS will split it up and issue it to the disk so that the Linux block layer isn't going to split every bio we send it in half anyway. I don't know if that will help much. I haven't had a chance to measure it, but just another thing I noticed there, that basically because we found by reducing the aggregation and never sending a big enough thing that it has to get split, we avoided this problem. It made us wonder why we were sending so many that had to be split in the first place.
The question, what should be the splits? Like as I've told, some devices, some controllers support arbitrary scatter gather, others require splitting on page sizes. Where Linux will split, if I remember, I saw it was splitting on sector boundary. But we cannot go, in this case, we would like to go both below the page and below the sector boundary. We don't have that information, I am afraid.
Yeah. But we'll be digging more into that this week, and we'll share what we find.
Yeah, of course, it would be great to have arbitrary scatter gather support, arbitrary ABD. I found that we have some requirements of alignment for this ABD in encryption, in checksum, in some other places. It's not big, but it's like somewhere 64 bytes, sometimes 32, something like that. And that we could handle more or less. In some places, it's already handled, but it's definitely not handled on the VDEV layer. There, it's worse, I saw.
Right. Sounds good. It sounds like there's some more investigation to be done there, but
yeah,
it's interesting. So
yeah, just another side effect of, not everything will actually accept 512 bytes anymore.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a corner case, like you say. The gang blocks don't usually get kicked in. Yeah, so when we do fix this, it would be great to pull in the test case you put together to make sure it stays fixed.
Yeah, I think it's just adding making the percentage chance of it happening a tunable as well, so we can say any blocks bigger than this become a gang block, so that we can, exactly, be able to add a test case for this and make sure that it doesn't pop back up in the future.
Yeah. Sounds good. So you wanted to also talk about the latest BRT work for Linux, right?
Yes, so we have a pull request that hooks up copy file range, clone file range, dedupe file range, fi clone, all the various things that Linux user space can use to Pavel's BRT work, so that you can do it all with the built-in tools on Linux. And then we're also working on a Samba module, a VFS_ZFS for Samba. So Samba will know to use BRT for server-side copies. So if you copy a file from Samba to Samba on the same machine, if it can use copy file range and end up BRTing it and being much higher performance.
Very cool. So that's looking for reviewers at this point. It's in pretty good shape.
Yep, it's
Okay.
there. It's got a bunch of tests for all the different ioctls and syscalls, and it's just looking for some review.
Yeah, I remember seeing that there was good test coverage there, and there are a lot of different kernel variations handled. Looks like there's a lot of compatibility code there. So
yeah, Linux tends to add ioctls and syscalls kind of really strange way.
They're not shy about changing things.
Yeah, well, even looking at the previous thing, there's a nice helper function to here's a bdev, how many segments will it take? But it's not available on Ubuntu like 2004, only newer versions. But if you get the queue, then there's a function that can do it, but not if you're on really old kernels. And it's just
yeah. I was happy to see all that stuff get tackled because it's such a pain.
Yep.
But yeah, it needs to be done. Cool.
Oh, yeah. In addition to SMB, it should also help NFS, which also has server-side copy.
Yep.
According to our service teams, it's told should both SMB and NFS should work. We are investigating that. How will it go? One of my teammates, Amir Hamza, already. Oh, sorry, not different. Amir Salim is now playing with that, trying to run some tests. Maybe you'll see his feedback on APR. Because we're also interested in it, are also playing with it.
Yeah, I think that'll be a nice thing to have, just have that work on all the operating systems.
And this, I was going to say, this still doesn't support the issue about copying between data sets, right? Like on Linux,
I think
there were still issues there,
I think one of them can do it.
Yeah.
But the default for like cp-f ref links is if you use force, yes. If you don't use the other one, no, or something. It's detailed in the pull request. Rob has the context. I don't.
Yeah, the semantics were subtle.
Yes.
And based on the kernel version, and yeah. Great.
There's a reflink always, like one of them uses one syscall and one uses another syscall.
Yeah.
Like practically, if you do demand it to be cloned, then cloning is supported only within file system. But if you said you're okay with optional copying, then which most people should be okay. I don't know why would somebody require clone. It should work across. And science, as I was told, both Samba and Linux NFS server both use copy file range syscall. Copy file range, it should be mapped proper way. It should work across file systems, but that's, as I told, we're still gonna test.
Yeah. But yeah, we were under the impression that Samba was going to require a bit of special, like they have a module for ButterFS to do the right calls on it. And so we were going to, one way or another, make sure that it works on ZFS so that server-side copying works correctly.
Our Samba resident Andrew Walker told it should work with copy file range and it should be great by itself. But I don't know what of that is upstream. Like he may have some local patches or something. But he told it should be mostly there, as I understood.
Great. And then the other thing we're working on is expanding Z. Based on the work we did, I don't know, some number of months ago, to allow you to configure Z with VDEV properties to control, after how many write errors or checksum errors do we replace the disk with a spare. Expanding that so that if there are too many slow IOs on a disk, it will auto spare it. Since I had yet another disk that decided to go out to lunch but not actually die. It's like, I'll do one IO every 3 seconds or something and drag the performance of the whole pool down. And so this will auto offline it or replace it with a spare and let you just be able to configure that in the same way we do checksum and disk errors at the moment.
And in this case, slow IO is the whatever internal limit we have in ZFS at the moment. When it decides an IO slow, it's, I don't know, 30 seconds or something like that, really long, right?
Yeah, whatever it counts. Like I think it already raises a Z event about each slow IO, and you can see a count of them with one of the flags for Z equal status. So this would just be teaching it to actually, you be able to set a threshold count and a threshold time and say, if it does this, then try to replace the disk and keep my pool healthy.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So that should be coming relatively soon. And I had one other question about, we were helping somebody with a 0.8 install of ZFS and looking at performance, and they were getting huge amount of CPU time spent loading and unloading metaslabs. Because in 0.8, if you don't use a metaslab for 3 transaction groups, we unload it and then have to load it again. Whereas I think in 2.0 or I think 0.8.3 even, we added the kind of cool off time where it's like, once we've loaded it, don't unload it for at least 10 minutes or whatever to avoid this problem. But they're not in a position to change version of ZFS right now. So we set the metaslab debug unload parameter, which just doesn't unload the metaslabs. Are there consequences to leaving that on? Is there like stuff that only happens when it unloads the metaslab? I think condensing normally happens on load, not unload, right?
Yeah, so that should be fine is my understanding. And that was the workaround people used for a long time until we got this properly fixed in newer versions of ZFS, is they just not unload them. I think the only downside is it's just going to consume memory.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the only issue there. Yeah. We used it a lot.
Usually a lot of memory as things run, but.
Well, I think this machine's got at least 256 gigs, so it's probably not going to hurt anything. Although there are 15,000 metaslabs.
Yeah, so you might look, it could easily be tens of gigabytes of memory consumed by the metaslab, but if you've got it and it's all by all means. They'd
be fine with tens of gigabytes as long as it's not 50s of gigabytes probably. But yeah, and that's kind of gets back to another thing I think we talked about before, but I want to get back to is we probably do need to change some of the tuning so that creating a 14-wide RAID Z3 doesn't result in 15,000 metaslabs when the target was 200. And kind of figuring out where the right sweet spot is, because it's probably more than 200, but it's probably less than 15,000 for a single VDEV.
I recall there was recently, semi-recently, in the last few years, some work done to adjust those tunings, I thought.
Yeah, they went the other way. They changed the default target from 50 terabytes per VDEV to 3 terabytes per VDEV. And so works great for small VMs, but
I see.
I think one thing that we talked about before is maybe changing the tuning from I think what they set before was the default maximum size for Metaslab is 16 gigabytes of space. And then it will keep increasing the count until the count gets too high. Then it'll bump the size to the next power of 2. But the max number is 128,000.
Oh, you never get there, basically.
Well, you can. We created a 10 petabyte pool, and it ended up with 98,000 metaslabs of 64 gigs each or something like that. But yeah. So what we were looking at was maybe every time we hit the limit to alternate between bumping the size and the count. So we aim for 200, and if that's not enough, we go up to 400, and if that's not enough, then we double the size, and then we double the count and double the size, double the count or something, to try to, not pessimize smaller pools, but also have a way of scaling to large pools that isn't just have lots and lots and lots of these, because it's,
So if you're able to unload them cleanly, what's the problem actually with having potentially a large number of metaslabs? Where does it start causing trouble?
It does give you more fragmentation, although not that much more. It just seems that you spend a lot more time cycling, especially. The other thing is, if you're using large record size, then if your metaslab's limited to 16 gigabytes and you're allocating 16 megabyte chunks, then that's only 1,000 segments for the whole metaslab. And maybe, depending on your use case, you want, we made most of the things tunables already. Those are, I think you already merged all those. So that gives people a bit more control, but we'll want to look at the defaults a bit more and do some analysis to see if there's advantages one way or another, because we don't want to just change the numbers because we don't want a big number, but to actually have more rationale around it. We'll get some time and dig into that more.
Yeah.
If I remember, too many meta slabs would require us to sync them separately. And if we do it, first we'll write all the updates into global log, but then we need to purge that log sometimes. And for that, we need to distribute all the difference between all the meta slabs. Just the number of IOs is growing randomly. And if we don't do it dynamically, then we would have to do it on pull import. But also a lot of IOs. Of course,
Yeah, and
that makes sense.
Now it should be properly prefetched, but still a lot of IOs, not great.
Yeah, and I think to your and other people's points, especially in failover type scenarios, we want an unclean import to not be massively delayed by these. And so that's some of the cases we'll make sure to test as we figure out how best to approach this.
Yeah, sounds good. It'd be nice to consider, like you say, all the different geometries when approaching this for the pool. What makes the most sense?
Yeah, it's just, yeah, especially as hard drives are getting bigger now.
Yeah.
Especially if we start seeing, 128 terabyte SSDs, then suddenly you could make a pool that was one VDEV is a lot bigger than we ever thought it was going to be.
Yes. All right. Do we have anything else on the agenda folks want to talk about? I see there's one there called test failures.
That was the one we talked about, the ZIL suspend hanging tests, because we noticed that was reporting test failures on the BRT Linux pull request. It's like, we didn't do that. So I remember Mav saying he hit the same one, so that wasn't us.
Yeah. There still are a handful of other test failures we still see in the test suite too. Not entirely reliably, like all annoying failures, right? Hit it 1 run in 10, right? But that's enough to be annoying. But yeah, I'm all for writing those down. I guess I'll just make one other call for testing. A week or two ago, we tagged the 2.2 RC1 release. So that's out there for people to start kicking the tires on and do a little bit of testing. We'll pull some fixes back for an RC2, I hope, shortly, and get that out there for some more testing. But yeah, just to plea for additional test coverage on that, manual testing and the automated testing.
Brian, I created a couple PRs, one for 2.2, one for 2.1 to merge a couple things.
Yeah.
Please take a look. They're like fix for replication or crash during replication is pretty annoying. We need it soon for in 2.1, and I also included 2.2. So
yeah,
a few other things.
I'll take a look and pull them in. We also probably want to make a pass to see if there's anything else we missed, we want to pull back that's been merged to master that makes sense for 2.2 or 2.1.
Yeah, we're really hoping the BRT stuff can get merged and make it through that.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
And it sounds like, Mav, you guys want that as well, right?
Well, yeah, we want it at some point. Either we want it right now or postpone till next release. We'll see how stable it is. People were quite scared previously.
Yes, I think Pavel got all the problems out of it, but yeah, the bits to make copy file range use BRT are in the pull request that we just opened. To make it use it on Linux. I mean, it's been on FreeBSD for a while, but
yeah.
Great.
All right. I guess anybody else have anything they want to bring up or talk about? Sounds like we covered everything.
Covered all my things.
Yeah. All right. Well, if folks don't have anything else, we had a pretty successful call this week. Thanks everybody for attending.
Yes. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks.